It's now June 15th, which means that some of these rocks have been tumbling for 4 months. Wow. I've decided to go ahead and stop with the course stage and begin the polishing. As you will see, some of these rocks didn't make it. Others have gotten really small. They've all gotten smaller, as you would expect. Some of them will not be perfect or flawless like I like. But after looking at them, I've realized that some of these rocks that I collected along the riverbank just were never meant to be perfect. So a quick look here. You see these little fossil rocks. Ground down to just about nothing. I'll still go ahead and polish these. You see the stripy rocks and the jaspery rocks. Little agate rocks. There's that coarse grit one. Or I should say the coarse finish one that probably won't shine. And the quartzy rocks. This is as good as I'm going to get them in the course stage. So as you can see, there are still some little flaws in there. But once they polish up, I think they'll look pretty nice. So I'm going to get these in the 18-pound barrel for the vibratory tumbler. And since these are not enough rocks to fill it, I'm going to add just some other rocks I've been working on. I'll make sure and keep these all separate so you can see the end result. But the next step will be to get all these going in the 220 grit. And I'll go over that here in just a second. Okay, so I've got all the rocks loaded. I'm going to turn on the tumbler and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of the 220 grit. That's 2 tablespoons for this 18-pound barrel, which is nearly full. It's gonna make a lot of noise when I start this without the cover on, so just bear with me. I should point out that the ceramic was already damp. So that's about 2 tablespoons of the silicon carbide 220 grit. And that's all it gets on this stage. I'll go ahead and give it a little bit more water, because I know it's going to need it. And then I'll put the cover on and I'll check it in a few hours. By the way, for those of you who have these vibratory tumblers, the first thing you want to do is get a hacksaw and cut off about 3 inches of this threaded rod. I don't know why they come so long from the factory. I had to do it for both these tumblers. But there we go. So I'll check back in, I don't know, 6 hours or so, see how it's going. We're gonna run this like this for 2 days. Well, it's been a little over 2 days, maybe 2.5, almost 3 days because I got tied up with some things, but that's all right. An extra day won't hurt. So now I'm going to do what's called the washout segment. Let's see how it looks. Nice and creamy. So to help with the cleaning, I add just a little bit of detergent on, and a little bit of water, something like that. Let this run for a couple of hours. It'll get nice and sudsy, and then I will take it off, rinse them all off, and get going on the next grit. Okay, it's washout time. Get it filled up with some water. Here's where I try to avoid getting a lot of this down the drain, for obvious reasons. But this little strainer does work well for me. Okay, here we are after the 220 grit. Not too different from before the 220 grit. You can see that, unfortunately, these aren't going to be as perfect as I had hoped, but they'll still turn out nice. Some of them I think are going to be close to flawless. Others are going to have little issues. So next I'm going to get them going again in the UV18 with the 600 silicon carbide grit. But this is what they're looking like now. All nice and dry. All right, we're ready for the next grit. This time we're using silicon carbide 600 grit. And I'm also going to be using some, this is borax, it's a good tub of borax. I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of the 600 grit and 1 tablespoon of the borax. I'm going to fire it up. It's going to be noisy. Bear with me. Let that vibrate and rotate for a while so everything mixes up nicely. And I let this go for 2 days like this. So again, that's 1 tablespoon of the silicon carbide 6090 grit, the silicon carbide 600 grit, and 1 tablespoon of the borax. I'll give it a little bit of water, because I know it's going to need some. Check back in a few hours, make sure everything's moving nicely. And after a couple of days, I will show you how it looks and we'll move on to the next stage. All right, the 600 grit has been going for 2 days. Time to do a washout. Let's see how it looks. I haven't checked this in over 24 hours, so let's see. Yeah, nice and sticky. Add a little detergent. And a little bit of water. Let that run for a couple hours, get nice and sudsy. And then I will rinse this out, get the stones out, check them out, put them back in at the next grit. So that was 600 grit for 2 days. We started with the 220 grit for 2 days. And you'll see what's next. Okay, the rocks are back in the barrel. It's time to go to the next stage. In this stage, we're going to use silicon carbide 1500. Not aluminum oxide, but silicon carbide. In fact, so far, all of the grit to this stage has been silicon carbide. I reserve the aluminum oxide just for the final polish. So I'll put in 1 tablespoon of this, plus 1 tablespoon of borax, and we'll go for 2 more days. So I'm gonna fire it up. You know the drill, nice and noisy. Kind of hard to get that stuff to come off of the scoop. Now the borax. As you probably know, the borax is really just used to create a sticky slurry to help distribute and hang on to the silicon carbide. All right, so get the top on and let that go for, well, actually, I forgot this. Add a little bit of water. Button it up, check on it in a few hours, make sure everything looks good, and this will go for 2 days. After that, guess what? It'll be time for the final polish. Okay, it's been 2 days with the 1500 silicon carbide grit. It's time for the washout. Let's see how it looks. Nice and creamy again. Little detergent. Little water. Let this go for at least an hour. And then I will get these all rinsed off and get these rocks ready for the final polish stage. I know it's been a long time. Before I put them in, I may do a couple of close-ups of what the rocks look like now, nice and dry. Here are a couple of the rocks dried off after the 1500 grit silicon carbide for 2 days. So as you can see, there's not much of a shine, but I didn't expect there to be much of a shine using the silicon carbide. Had I used the 1500 aluminum oxide, these would probably look really good. That's okay, because I think they're going to turn out pretty shiny for the most part. So here they are a little bit closer. See the surface. As you can see, they're not perfect. But they're close. All right, it's time for the final polish. So, for this, I'm going to use, well, the tub says Lortone, but I believe I've got some aluminum oxide in there from Kingsley North. But anyway, it's the 1 micron or so aluminum oxide. So I will use 1 tablespoon of that and 1 tablespoon of the borax. So let's get started. I try to distribute it evenly, not that it really matters. This is going to go for 2 days, so the powder will have plenty of time to work its way around. All right, there's the 1 tablespoon of that. And then, of course, the borax. And you know what's next? Add a little bit of water. Why? Because I know I'm going to need it. I'm going to button it up and check it in a couple hours. And then check it tomorrow, make sure everything's moving nicely. And for 2 days, do the washout cycle, and then hopefully have some good results. Okay, it's time for the final washout cycle. Let's see how it looks. It's been 2 days in the aluminum oxide polish. I'm gonna add a little more detergent, some water, button it back up. And if that approximately 14,000 grit aluminum oxide polish has done its job, in a couple of hours we should have some beautiful stones. Okay, after 4 months, they're finally done. For the most part, I'm happy. However, I am disappointed in some respects because I was hoping to make this video to show you how to make perfect stones, and most of these are not perfect. A couple of them turned out really nice though, so let's take a closer look. Here is that coarse stone that I said would not take a great shine, and it didn't. But that was predictable. Here's a little piece of what I thought might be some kind of jasper. I'm not sure what it is. It could be a brecciated jasper, I suppose. But you can see it's got a little crack there. I try to avoid that, but it was just getting so small, I decided to go ahead and stop the grinding and get onto the polishing. Here's another piece of the jasper. After months of tumbling, it just would not, I could not get all these flaws out of it. Even if had I continued, these would have continued through the rock, so I had to just give up on it. Sometimes the rocks are just not meant to be perfectly smooth. But it still took a nice shine. It's a good looking rock. I like the color. This one, unfortunately, has all those little tiny pits. You see those? And there's some white residue from the polish in those. Now, what I can do to fix that, I can bathe this in mineral oil, and that will darken all those little spots. Then just polish it up with a soft rag, and it would look nice. Has that cool sort of a quartzy stripe in it right there. Here's one of the pieces of quartz that initially broke. If you watched part 1 of this video series, you saw this one broke right away. It never would smooth out like I had hoped. It just kept fracturing, and I was being very careful with keeping the barrel full. Didn't seem to matter. Took a decent shine though. That little red section there. Here's one of the little pieces of petrified wood. Petrified wood usually takes a great shine, as this one did. This one's so small, I decided there's no point in trying to get it perfect because it's going to vanish. So That's as good as I got it. This one you might remember if you watched part one. This one, after the first week of grinding, had some serious spalling on one end. Thankfully it did go away and I was able to save the rock. It's small, but it's a good looking rock. I like how that sort of, it almost looks like a human vein right there. I work in medical imaging and that sort of looks like an angiographic image of a heart right there with a vessel. Unfortunately, these fossil rocks were just too soft. And like I said in that part one, I didn't check any of these, I just threw them in the tumbler, and these ground down very quickly. Because they're so soft, they just would not take much of a shine at all. You see within there are some shiny sections that no doubt are just a harder material, but that's just the way it goes. You might remember this one from part one. It had some big spalling on it. It still has a little bit. There's a little bit right there, a little bit up there, a little bit there. But it's really smooth. And once again, I could have continued to tumble this, but I don't know that it would have ever gotten rid of all those. They probably just keep popping up. So it was time to stop and move on to the polish stage. Here's a little piece of quartz. Decent shine, not a very interesting rock. Sometimes that's what you get along the bank of the river. This is one of the fossil rocks that did take a good shine, however, there's not much in it to see. If you look closely, you can see some evidence of fossil in there, but I've got much better examples in my collection than this thing. There's a soft spot there on the end that did not shine, it just undercut. Not sure what that is. This was just one of the miscellaneous rocks. It's not very interesting. Took an okay shine though, but not very interesting and not perfect either. See that crack there? So needless to say, many of these in this batch will not end up on display. They'll end up probably in a garden or something. This one was a little bit of a surprise. It's not a perfect tumble by any means, but it has that, I guess it's hematite in it. It gives it that shiny metallic glint, which makes it rather interesting. I did not know it was going to have that until I started polishing it. But you can see it's got big fractures. It's a small rock, so I wasn't going to continue with that one either. It's just as good as it's going to get. Now here's one that's just about perfect. Oh, it's just some sort of shirt. I think, just like a banded shirt. Maybe a little agate material in there, some chalcedony. But it is just about flawless. This is what I look for in my rocks. Well, there's a little problem there. See, now that I'm looking at it closely, I'm disappointed because look at that. I missed a little spot right there. Oh darn. It's not the end of the world. I'll get over it. Otherwise, it's a beautiful little Central Texas rock. This is one that I thought was jasper. It might be, but I'm not sure. It almost has the wrong look. And you see that pitting right there. That, to me, jasper doesn't normally do that, so I'm not sure what this is. Don't know. Took an okay shine. And here's another nondescript little rock, part of the group. Again, it had these fractures you can see, but the rock was so small I wasn't going to continue. There's just nothing more to do with this to make it more perfect. It was going to be this way no matter what. This might actually be petrified wood now that I look at it. I think I see the grain of wood in there. Yeah, well, that's something anyway. Here's an example of one of the agate rocks. Jasper, I suppose, but you can see, if you look closely, the chalcedony that sort of holds this thing together. Unfortunately, this is another example of a rock that was just not ever meant to be perfect. I believe if you remember in part one, this is the one that had some very deep holes in it, so I had to tumble it. This is one of the reasons why this took so many months. I had to tumble it down to try to get it smooth, and you can see it just still continued to have issues. So it's time to give up on rocks like this and move on to the polish stage. It's not going to ever be perfect. That's okay, it's still a handsome rock, if there is such a thing. A little quartzy rock. Okay, there's that fracture, more fractures. Not perfect like I like. But that's what you get sometimes when you just go out and pick up rocks for free along the river. Now this one's nearly perfect. It's got a couple of small issues there. But it took a very nice shine. There's a tiny amount of undercutting I've noticed in this, and some tiny pitting there. You see that? But otherwise, it's in really good shape. This one I believe might, yeah, I think this is a piece of petrified wood as well. Not perfect, but not bad for wood. Got kind of a nice little grain pattern in it. Very small. I like to start with much larger rocks so that when I get them to the point that I like, they're still decent size. So that's one reason why I use those big tumblers, 20-pound barrels, because I know I'm going to have to start with much larger rocks. There's just a little piece of jasper of some type, I believe. Not perfect, but not too bad. Again, those little fractures are just impossible to tumble out. So you do what you can and then just be happy with the results. There's a big chunk of what I was calling jasper agate. I had high hopes for this one. It turned out okay, but it's far from perfect. See that big fracture there? But you can also notice, here you'll see that the agate part there. So it's an attractive rock, but it's just not perfect. Yeah, little pits in there. Here's another little agate rock. This one you can see the little fortification bands. Unfortunately, as you see, it still is not perfect. You see that big fracture right there. I either need longer fingers or shorter gloves. You see that here, you can sort of see the chalcedony pockets. I don't know what that little section was there. That's like an eyeball. Great thing about nature, boy, it's just an amazing array of variety in these rocks. Look at that. Took a nice shine, especially over that section there. I just wish I could have eliminated that right there. These larger quartz pieces turned out pretty good. That one's got a little bit of problem there. So a quick review of what I did. So after the course stage, which took almost 4 months, I moved to the vibratory tumbler, and I used the 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 method I came up with, by the way. Just experimenting. So I do 2 days at 2 scoops of 220 grit. So 2 days, they're all 2 days. So there's part of the 2, all the stages are 2 days. And all the stages use 2 scoops. So the first stage is 2 days at 2 scoops of 220 silicon carbide. Here's the larger one. This one turned out pretty good. I'm happy with this one. It's not 100% perfect, but it's really close. So the second stage is, oh, I should say that. Yes, the second of the polishing stages is 2 days with 1 scoop of 600 silicon carbide and 1 scoop of borax. So that's 2 scoops. So 2 days at 2 scoops is the theme here. So it's 1 scoop of the 600 and 1 scoop of the borax for 2 days. The next stage, again for 2 days, is 1 scoop of the 1500 silicon carbide and 1 scoop of borax. I stick with the silicon carbide because I think of this like you're preparing the surface for paint. You want to get it as smooth as possible. Silicon carbide keeps its shape longer and does a better job. Think of it as sanding these stones, and you're preparing the stone for the final polish. So I stick with the silicon carbide. to that point. I have aluminum oxide at those grits, but I stick with the silicon carbide because I think it prepares the surface of the stone bed. So I do that 1 scoop of the 1500, 1 scoop of borax for 2 days. So again, 2 scoops, 2 days. And the final stage is 1 scoop of the aluminum oxide polish, which is around 14,000 grit, and then 1 scoop of borax for 2 days. And you can get results like this. It's very simple. Now I realize, I watch a lot of these YouTube videos, and there's some great people out there. I enjoy watching them, especially Rob from Michigan Rocks. I enjoy his videos tremendously. He does a great job. And he has a different formula, and he gets great results. So I recommend just experiment, try different things. Try different things, but I can assure you that this little formula will give you some beautiful results if you take the time to do it. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I know this one's a little long. I'll be putting out a lot more of these videos, so stay tuned. And thank you for watching.